The coffee my brother handed me tasted different that night. Not wrong exactly, just off like something sweet had been stirred in and poorly disguised. I drank half of it because I was tired and because I trusted him. That was the last clear decision I made for the next several hours. I remember sitting on the couch in my parents' living room, watching the ceiling fan turn slow, lazy circles. I remember thinking I should stand up, go check on my mother, take my phone off the charger. I remember none of those things happening. My body went quiet in a way sleep doesn't feel. Not drifting, not gradual. More like a door swinging shut. I couldn't move. I could hear everything. My brother's voice came from the kitchen first. Low, the way he talks when he thinks no one important is listening. A second voice answered, someone I didn't recognize, a man, clipped and professional. I heard the phrase, sign here. I heard my own name. And then I heard my brother say the thing that cut through whatever fog was pressing down on me like a knee to the chest. She won't know until it's too late to matter. My name is Claire. I'm 28 years old, and I teach 3rd grade at an elementary school in Portland, Oregon. I have a studio apartment with a second-hand couch and a window box of herbs that are mostly surviving. I keep my life small and manageable because growing up, small and manageable was the only way to stay out of the way. My family is from Scottsdale, Arizona. My father built a landscaping business from 3 trucks and a borrowed credit card into something that employed 40 people by the time I was in high school. He wasn't warm exactly, but he was fair in a way I've come to understand was rarer than it seemed. He died of a heart attack 3 years ago, quick and without warning, on a Tuesday morning in October while drinking his first cup of coffee. My mother called me crying so hard I couldn't understand the words, only the shape of them. My brother, Derek, was 34 then. He stepped into the executor role before anyone asked him to. That was how Derek operated. He didn't volunteer, he installed himself, and by the time you sought to question it, the structure had already been built around him. I didn't fight it. I was 25 and grieving, and Portland felt very far from everything. Derek lived 20 minutes from my parents. He drove my mother to appointments. He handled the paperwork. I told myself this was him being responsible. I told myself it made sense. The thing about believing a convenient story is how much work it saves you in the short term. My mother had a stroke in February, minor enough that she came home from the hospital after 4 days, but significant enough that she needed help. Derek called me on a Sunday night and said I should come. His voice had that particular flatness he used when he'd already made a decision and was informing me of it rather than asking. I arranged 2 weeks of substitute coverage and drove down. The drive from Portland to Scottsdale is long and empty in the middle and forces you to think more than is useful. I thought about my mother, mostly. About how she'd looked smaller at my father's funeral, like some structural support had been quietly removed. About how little we'd spoken in the years since. Not from anger, just distance. The kind that grows in the space between 2 people who don't know how to close it. I arrived on a Wednesday. The house was the same. Terracotta tiles, the big saguaro my father planted in the side yard when I was 7, the faint smell of the eucalyptus oil my mother kept in a diffuser in the entryway. It smelled like childhood, which is its own specific kind of grief. My mother was in good spirits, sharper than I'd expected. Her left hand trembled slightly, and she moved carefully, but her mind was clear, and her humor was intact. She called Derek bossy within 10 minutes of my arrival, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like weeks. Derek was less easy. He filled every room he was in, organizing things that didn't need organizing, offering opinions no one requested. He'd hired a woman named Patricia to come weekday mornings, and he had opinions about how Patricia arranged the pillows, and when my mother ate lunch, I stayed out of it. I made coffee and helped my mother with her exercises and read to her in the afternoons, which she claimed she didn't enjoy but kept asking me to continue. On my 3rd day there, I found the voicemail. It was on my father's old answering machine, the kind with a physical tape, sitting on the shelf in his office like it had been sitting there for 3 years untouched. I'd gone in to look for a phone charger and saw it. I pressed play, mostly out of habit. There were 12 messages. Birthday greetings from people I didn't recognize. A dentist appointment reminder. A call from his accountant, dated 5 weeks before he died, asking him to call back about the account transfer and the amendment to the beneficiary designation. I played it twice. Then I stood in my father's office and looked at the answering machine for a long time before I turned the lights off and went back to the kitchen. I didn't say anything to Derek. I don't know exactly why, something told me not to. The same instinct that makes you go quiet when you hear an unfamiliar sound in an empty house. I filed it away and kept moving through the days. What I should have done was call someone immediately. What I actually did was convince myself I was overreacting. This is a pattern I'm working on. The following Monday, Derek made dinner. This was unusual enough that I noticed it. He typically arrived, assessed, delegated, and left. Cooking was not part of his repertoire. He made pasta, which was fine, and poured wine, which I barely touched because I'd been tired all week. And then afterward, he made coffee and handed me a mug while I sat on the couch, and I drank it because I was tired and because I trusted him. The heaviness started in my legs. I remember noticing it and not quite connecting the pieces fast enough. I remember setting the mug down on the coffee table with a careful deliberateness that should have alarmed me. I remember thinking I would just sit for a minute. I remember my mother's bedroom door closed at the end of the hallway, her light off, and thinking I should go check on her, and then the thought dissolving before I could do anything with it. My eyes stayed open. Everything else stopped cooperating. The doorbell rang. Derek answered it, and I heard him bring someone in through the kitchen away from me, but voices carry in that house. Always have. When I was a teenager, I knew every argument my parents had because sound moves through the walls the way water moves. It finds the path. She's resting. Derek's voice, lower than usual. We need to do this now, before. The other man said something I couldn't fully catch. Professional tone, clipped sentences. Just the signature page, Derek said. The rest is already handled. She won't contest it later. She never does. And by the time she understands what she signed. The beneficiary change is irrevocable once filed, the man said. You understand that. That's the point. I want to describe what that moment felt like. I want to find language for hearing your own brother say something that rearranges the entire architecture of who you believed him to be. I can't do it precisely. It felt like the ground shifting horizontally rather than dropping, not falling, but everything suddenly tilted, and nothing around me was where I thought it was. I was not asleep. I was not confused. I understood exactly what was happening, and I could not do a single thing about it. My father's life insurance policy had a substantial payout. There was also the sale of the business. Derek had handled that after Dad died, and I'd signed things at the time without reading carefully because I was grieving and Derek was my brother and I had no reason not to trust him. There was the investment account, the one Dad had been quietly building since before I was born, the one he'd mentioned once, casually, saying it was for both of you, split down the middle, don't let anyone talk you out of that. I had never followed up. I had taken his word as the thing itself, not understanding that words require documentation to survive the people who speak them. Footsteps crossed the living room. I kept my eyes mostly closed, just a sliver open, the way a child pretends to be asleep. A man I'd never seen before stood at the edge of the coffee table, mid-50s, glasses, a leather portfolio under his arm. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they've been told is already solved. He put something on the table next to my hand. She needs to sign, he said quietly. Give me a second. Derek crouched beside me. He said my name. He said it again louder. He touched my shoulder. I kept breathing slowly. I kept my hand loose and unresponsive. She's out, Derek said after a moment. The man didn't sit down. I could feel his discomfort from 3 feet away, the way someone's stillness changes when they're recalculating. This isn't how I understood the arrangement, he said. She'll sign in the morning. I told you, she's compliant. She doesn't question things. Something shifted in the man's voice then, tightened around the edges. If she didn't consent to this meeting, I'm not putting my license on it. That's not the agreement. A pause. I'm going to leave my card. If she wants to call me, she knows where to reach me. Derek started to argue. The man was already moving toward the door. I lay there and listened to my brother let him out. I listened to Derek stand in the kitchen for a long time afterward, doing nothing, just standing. I heard him pour something down the drain. I heard him pick up his phone and make a call that went to voicemail and leave a short message I couldn't fully make out. Then I heard the garage door. Then nothing. I waited for 20 minutes. I know it was 20 minutes because I stared at the clock on the cable box across the room and counted. When I was as sure as I could be that he was gone, I sat up. My body felt like I'd been draped over a fence while I wasn't paying attention. My legs worked, barely, the way legs work in the first few minutes after a long car ride, present but reluctant. I stood up by gripping the arm of the couch and held there until the room settled. The card was still on the table. The man had left it, true to his word. Theodore Marsh, licensed notary and document services. A local number. I took the card. I checked on my mother, asleep, breathing normally, fine. I found my phone in the kitchen where it had been charging, and I went to the car in the garage and I drove. I didn't drive anywhere in particular. I drove until my hands stopped shaking, which took about 15 minutes, and then I pulled into a gas station on Scottsdale Road and sat under the fluorescent lights and tried to think clearly. The accountant's voicemail. The accountant's voicemail. The account transfer. The amendment to the beneficiary designation. My father's investment account. The insurance payout. Whatever Derek had been handling for 3 years without any accounting I'd ever seen. I called my college roommate, Becca, who was now a paralegal in Chicago and who had, on more than one occasion, told me I needed to be more careful about signing things without reading them. It was 11:30 at night. She answered on the second ring, because Becca is the kind of person who answers her phone. I told her what happened. I told her about the coffee, the paralysis, the notary, the voicemail. I told her about signing papers 3 years ago in the fog of grief without fully understanding what was in them. Becca was quiet through most of this, and her quiet is not the kind that means she isn't listening. Her quiet is the kind that means she isn't listening. Her quiet is the kind that means she is building something. You need a probate attorney, she said. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow is too slow. Do you have your father's will? I didn't know where the will was. I said as much. Derek has it, she said, and the certainty in her voice told me she'd already worked out more of this than I had, which means you need your own copy from the courthouse. Probate records are public. They filed it when your father died. You can pull it yourself at the Maricopa County Clerk's office first thing in the morning. She paused. Also, save that voicemail. Record it on your phone if you have to. Do it tonight. I drove back to the house. I went directly to my father's office and I held my phone up to the answering machine speaker and I played the accountant's message and recorded every word. Then I photographed the machine itself, the date display, the counter showing 12 messages. Then I sat on the floor of my father's office, surrounded by the smell of him, old paper and cedar, and the particular silence of a room that's been waiting. And I let myself feel the full weight of it for about 4 minutes. Then I stood up and went to bed because tomorrow was going to require me to be functional. His name was Thomas, the attorney Becca found for me, and he worked out of a small office in Tempe with stacks of files that looked precarious, but apparently had a system. He was 60, methodical, and deeply unimpressed by people who used legal processes to bully family members, which I learned about him within the first 5 minutes. I laid out everything I had. The recording, the notary's card, the timeline of what I'd heard and when, my account of signing documents 3 years ago without adequate explanation. Thomas listened without interrupting, took notes on a legal pad in handwriting that was aggressively neat, and asked exactly 2 questions. Do you have any documentation of the original account designations? And would your mother be willing to provide a statement? I called my mother that afternoon from the courthouse parking lot while I was waiting for the clerk to locate my father's probate file. I told her everything, the coffee, what I heard, the account transfer. Her silence lasted long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected. I wondered, she finally said. About some things. I didn't let myself wonder too hard. Mom, your father meant that account to be split, she said, and her voice was steadier than I expected. He said it to both of you at dinner once. You probably don't remember. You were maybe 17. He said it like it was settled, and he never brought it up again because he thought he'd been clear. A breath. I'll talk to the lawyer. I'll say what I know. The probate file was thorough. Thomas walked me through it that afternoon with a patience that I imagined he'd had to cultivate deliberately over decades. My father's will, filed and probated, did specify an equal split of the investment account. What had happened subsequently, the beneficiary designation amendment, filed 8 months after probate closed, listed only Derek. Beneficiary designations override wills, Thomas explained, which is precisely why people change them. If the original designation named both of you and the amendment lists only him, we have a question of whether your consent was obtained or whether this was executed without your knowledge. He looked at me over the legal pad. Given what you've described about being asked to sign documents in the weeks after your father's death, while you were grieving, without clear explanation of their contents, that is potentially undue influence at minimum and fraud at worst. What does that mean practically? It means we file a motion to compel disclosure of all account documents and correspondence. It means we subpoena the financial institution. It means we ask the notary, this Theodore Marsh, whether he was present for the original amendment filing and under what circumstances. Thomas set down his pen. And it means you let me do the talking from here. I called Theodore Marsh the next morning. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been expecting my call. He was careful, the way people are careful when they realize they've been positioned on the wrong side of something and are deciding whether to stay there. He had notarized documents for my brother, he said, on multiple occasions over the past 2 years. Most of it was routine, but approximately 14 months ago, he had been present for a beneficiary amendment, signing in which the person signing had, he paused here, chose his words carefully, appeared to be in an altered state. He had raised concerns at the time. He had been told the person was on medication. He had, and he said this with what I recognized as genuine regret, filed the notarization anyway. Last night, he told me, he had left because something had felt wrong in a way he couldn't continue to rationalize away. He'd left my card because he'd wanted me to have options. If there's a proceeding, he said, and I'm asked about that day 14 months ago, I'll tell the truth. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in March, 6 weeks after I'd driven back to Portland with my father's answering machine in the backseat of my car wrapped in a towel. I took the semester personal leave. I'd been accumulating for 4 years and used it. Some things are more important than managing a classroom, which is something I would never normally say. Derek called me twice in those 6 weeks. The first call, he was casual, asking if I was coming back to help with Mom, noting that Patricia wasn't covering weekends. I was pleasant and non-committal, and we hung up without him realizing I knew anything. The second call came 3 days before the hearing, and the casualness was gone. Someone had contacted him about the subpoena, the financial institution probably, or someone on his end with a paper trail they were suddenly very aware of. He said he didn't know what I thought I was doing. He said Dad would have wanted us to handle things as a family. He said the word ungrateful in a sentence that I will not repeat because it doesn't deserve to take up space in this story. I let him finish. Then I said, I'll see you Thursday. I've thought about what I wore to that hearing more than is probably rational. I wore a green dress with a blazer over it, the blazer my mother had bought me for a job interview 7 years ago and told me I looked serious in. I thought about her saying that while I was getting dressed, and I thought about how long she had been right about more than I'd given her credit for. Derek was already in the room when I arrived, with his attorney, a man whose suit was expensive in a way that seemed designed to communicate certainty. Derek looked at me the way I imagine he'd looked at the notary 3 weeks before the hearing when the subpoena arrived, recalibrating, rearranging, looking for an exit that wasn't there. Thomas had told me to let him speak first. I was good at that. The other side led with family dynamics, with grief and complexity and the difficulty of administering an estate, with the suggestion that I had been insufficiently involved in the years following my father's death and was now motivated by, it was implied without being said directly, jealousy or financial need, manufacturing a dispute. Thomas waited. He was a good waiter. Then he stood up and he did not raise his voice once. He introduced the original will. He introduced the beneficiary designation, filed and dated. He introduced the amendment, and then he introduced the accountant's message from the answering machine, the one asking my father to call back about the transfer, dated before my father died. meaning the amendment had been discussed before my father's death, meaning my father had likely known and potentially objected. He introduced the financial institution's records obtained through the subpoena, showing the amendment had been processed with a single signature, mine. According to the filing, at a time when I had been in Portland and had documentary proof of it in the form of substitute teaching records and 2 credit card transactions in Multnomah County. My signature on a document on a day I was 4 states away. He introduced Theodore Marsh's sworn statement about the signing he had witnessed 14 months prior, the one where the person signing had appeared impaired, and what that signing had produced. He introduced my mother's statement, which was brief and measured and precisely accurate, and which said that her late husband had explicitly told his children the investment account would be divided equally. The room had gotten very quiet by then. Derek's attorney requested a recess. The arbitrator granted 10 minutes. When we reconvened, the other side's tone had changed in the way that tones change when the architecture collapses, and everyone in the room knows it. The arbitrator made several findings. The beneficiary amendment was invalidated on the basis of fraud, specifically the forged signature. The financial institution was ordered to restore the original equal beneficiary designation and process the distribution accordingly. The matter was referred to the State Attorney General's office for further investigation into the forged documentation, and a flag was placed on Derek's license to operate as a business entity in Arizona, pending review. When it was read aloud, the value of the account as of that date was larger than I had understood. My father had been more careful and more patient than any of us had known. For a moment, I couldn't arrange my face correctly, and I had to look down at my hands until I could. Outside the building afterward, Derek found me before I could get to Thomas's car. He looked reduced somehow, like something internal had been let out. He said my name and then he stopped. I waited. Dad would have... He started. "Don't," I said. Not loud, not unkind, just a closed door. He stood there. I watched him understand that there was no version of this conversation in which he was the person who'd been wronged, and that I was not going to help him locate one. That was the last thing I was ever going to do for him. Thomas walked me to his car and said, "You did well in there." I told him it was mostly him. He said, "The evidence did the work. You just refused to disappear." I drove to my mother's house that evening with takeout from the Thai place she'd been saying she wanted to try for 2 months. We ate on the couch with the TV on low. She held my hand for a moment between bites, without saying anything about it, which is how my mother says the things she doesn't have words for. I let her keep holding it. I stayed 2 more weeks. I helped her refinance the house into her name alone, something Thomas had suggested, and that she'd clearly been wanting for longer than she'd admitted. I drove her to her cardiology follow-up and her physical therapy, and one afternoon we went to the botanical garden and walked slowly through the desert section, and she named every plant we passed because she had been doing that since I was small, and the habit had outlasted everything else. The criminal matter took longer. These things do. Derek's case moved through the system over the following year, documented and deliberate. The forged signature, the impersonation, the financial fraud, each piece required its own process. His attorney negotiated where he could and couldn't. What came back was 2 years, suspended to 18 months with restitution, the full value of the account plus legal fees, plus interest calculated from the date of the fraudulent amendment. When the sentencing happened, I was in Portland. Thomas called me with the summary. I sat in my car in the school parking lot after the last bell had rung, and the kids had all gone home, and I read the summary twice. I thought about my father making coffee on a Tuesday morning. I thought about the answering machine sitting in my father's office for 3 years, accumulating dust and holding a message that mattered, just waiting for someone to press play. I thought about how many times I had not pressed play on the things in front of me, because pressing play requires accepting what you're about to hear. My mother and I talk every Sunday now. Sometimes longer, sometimes just to confirm nothing has changed, and that is, on its own, a pleasant thing to confirm. She is doing well. Her hand trembles less than it did. She's taken up watercolor, which she says is relaxing, and which she is objectively terrible at. Which I told her and which made her laugh harder than I'd heard in years. I am still a 3rd grade teacher in Portland. I still have the second-hand couch and the herb window box. The herbs are actually thriving now, which feels meaningful in a way I can't entirely explain. I tell this story because I spent a lot of years believing that not making things difficult was the same as being easy to love, that going along with things, not questioning, not pushing back, keeping the peace, that these were virtues, or at least the closest thing to safety available to me. My brother understood that about me and he built a plan around it. He was not wrong that it had worked before. He was wrong that it would always. If there is someone in your life who benefits from your silence, your compliance, your willingness to sign things you don't understand, because making a fuss feels worse than not knowing, understand that this is not protection. It is exposure. The person asking you not to look is always the person who knows what you'd find if you did. You are allowed to press play. You are allowed to know. And if the answering machine has been sitting in your father's office for 3 years with something important on it, go now, before anyone else decides what you're permitted to hear. If this story reached you somewhere true, leave it in the comments. Subscribe so you're here when the next story comes. They always do.